Silence fills the spaces where entire villages once stood. This video explores the unexplained disappearance of entire medieval populations from recorded history, a mystery that rewrites our understanding of the past. By the end, you will see the map of history not as a finished picture, but as a puzzle with missing pieces, revealing the fragile threads that connect us to those who came before. How did bustling communities vanish without a trace, their stories erased from all official memory? What does it mean for a people to be forgotten? What forgotten story from your own world might one day slip into a similar silence? A name vanishes from a ledger and a life is stripped from history. This is the core of the disappearance we are exploring, a process far more complex than mere physical extinction. When we say an entire population disappeared, we are not always describing a sudden, silent apocalypse that left the land empty. More often, we are witnessing a profound failure of memory, a collapse of the systems that were meant to remember. The people themselves may have moved, integrated with new groups, or simply endured, but the written proof of their existence, their unique identity and daily life, was lost. The thread connecting them to us was severed. This erasure from the record can happen in several quiet ways. Consider administrative neglect. A distant royal court, consumed by war or succession crises, might simply stop collecting taxes from a remote region. The scribes stop writing down the names of the villagers. To the central authority, that community effectively ceases to be. Or perhaps a monastery, the local center of record-keeping, is sacked and its library burned. The chronicles that held the births, deaths, and land disputes of a generation turn to ash. In that smoke, a people's past is obliterated. The most chilling example is the simple cessation of tax rolls. These mundane documents were the heartbeat of medieval bureaucracy, a yearly census of who owed what. When they stop, the silence is deafening. It creates the illusion of a vanished people, when the reality might be that the tax collector just never came back. Historical demographers, the detectives of past populations, constantly remind us of this vital distinction. A disappearance documented in our surviving sources is not necessarily a literal extinction event. It is more accurately a gaping hole in our evidence. This forces a humbling realization. The mystery is not always about what happened to them, but about why we stopped hearing about them. The reliability of the historical record itself becomes the central question. How many stories have been lost not to catastrophe, but to simple bureaucratic decay or a single fire? Understanding this definition, this chasm between what happened and what was written down, is the essential first step. It reframes our search from one for bones and ruins to a search for lost voices and for the reasons they were silenced in the first place. The very materials that held their stories were fragile. Medieval records were not kept in fireproof vaults or on digital clouds. They were written on parchment, which is made from animal skin. This material is strong, but over centuries it becomes brittle. It can be ruined by a single leak in a monastery roof, consumed by a stray ember from a fireplace, or rendered illegible by the damp of a forgotten cellar. The ink itself could fade. The survival of a document for 700 years is a minor miracle, a roll of the dice against time and the elements. The people writing these records were not modern data clerks. They were often monks in secluded scriptoria, their quills scratching by candlelight. Their mission was to glorify God and document the deeds of kings and saints, not to create a perfect census of every farmer and blacksmith. A local lord's dispute over a field might be recorded because it involved the monastery's own lands, but the daily life of an entire village, its births and marriages and small triumphs, was often beneath the notice of the chronicler. This creates a profound bias in our historical vision. We see the medieval world through a keyhole, glimpsing the glittering figures at the top of society while the vast, teeming population below remains in the shadows. For many small communities, their existence was never formally inscribed to begin with. Royal tax collectors might only visit a remote valley once in a generation. A manor lord might keep his own rolls, but if that single, fragile ledger was lost, the legal identity of every person on that land vanished with it. Their names, their obligations, their very right to be there, all erased in an instant. Historians now understand that the patchwork of records we have today is not a complete map of the medieval world. It is a collection of scattered islands that survived a sea of loss. The records that made it to our time did so largely by chance. This inherent fragility of the entire system, from the physical parchment to the selective focus of the scribes, set the stage for countless disappearances. When a community fades from history, we must first ask if its records were ever truly there, or if they were simply waiting to be lost. A single sheep grazing on a grassy mound might be standing on the foundation of a lost home. Across the English countryside, these gentle bumps and ridges in the earth are the ghosts of communities known as deserted medieval villages. They offer our first tangible connection to the abstract idea of a population fading from memory. Take the site of Warham, Percy, a place that now consists of crumbling church walls and empty fields. For centuries, it was a thriving village. Archaeological digs have revealed not a scene of sudden destruction, but one of gradual abandonment. House foundations show repairs that eventually stopped. The pottery fragments become fewer and fewer. This was not a single catastrophic event that wiped everyone out, but a slow, quiet draining away of life. The question is, what caused this long goodbye? The answer often lies in economic shifts that rewrote the value of the land and the people on it. Following the Black Death in the 14th century, England's population plummeted. With fewer people to work the fields for grain, the old system of farming vast strips of arable land became less profitable for the lords who owned the manors. A new opportunity emerged: wool. The demand for English wool in European markets was soaring. Raising sheep required far fewer laborers than growing crops. A single shepherd could manage flocks that grazed on land that once required dozens of farming families to work. This economic calculation, the move from labor-intensive arable farming to profitable sheep pasture, led to a process known as enclosure. Lords would literally enclose the common fields that villagers relied on, evicting the families to make way for grazing sheep. An entire community could be dispersed in a generation, their homes dismantled and their fields swallowed by pasture. The historical record sometimes captures this vanishing act with startling clarity. The Domesday Book, that great survey commissioned by William the Conqueror in the 11th century, meticulously lists Warham, Percy as a small but functioning settlement. Yet in later centuries, the village slowly fades from tax records and manorial accounts until it disappears from written history completely. The empty fields and the lone church ruin are silent witnesses to this transformation. They stand as monuments not to a mysterious plague, but to a deliberate economic choice that erased a community from the landscape and from official memory. How many other such choices, written not in chronicles but in profit margins, led to similar silences? Far to the north, on the icy shores of Greenland, another community slipped into silence. The Norse colonies, established with great ambition during a time of warmer climates, represent one of history's most compelling disappearances. For centuries, two settlements, the eastern and western, thrived. They built stone churches, traded walrus ivory and polar bear furs with Norway, and their existence was documented in Icelandic annals and letters. Then the records stop. The last known written account is a marriage record from the early 14th century. After that, nothing. The silence from Greenland was absolute. Archaeologists have pieced together a story of a society under mounting pressure. The climate was turning against them. The medieval warm period, which had made farming in Greenland possible, was giving way to the Little Ice Age. Summers grew shorter and colder, the sea ice expanded, and the pack ice that surrounded the island for more of the year made the vital sailing route to Iceland and Norway far more dangerous and often impossible. This was not just an inconvenience, it was an economic stranglehold. The Norse Greenlanders' entire economy was built on exporting luxury goods like walrus tusks to Europe, where they were carved into intricate items for the elite. In return, they received essential supplies they could not produce themselves: iron, timber, and grain. As the sea lanes closed, this lifeline was severed. They were utterly alone, yet the archaeological evidence suggests their end was not a single, swift catastrophe. Excavations of farmsteads show signs of increasing hardship, but not of a final, violent conflict. The bones of their livestock reveal that the cows, a symbol of their European identity, grew stunted and malnourished as the pastureland failed. They began to eat more seal, a resource their Inuit neighbors expertly hunted, but the Norse seem to have been reluctant to fully adopt the nomadic hunting lifestyle that allowed the Thule people to thrive in the very same conditions. This points to a profound cultural inflexibility. They clung to their European ways, farming and raising cattle in a climate that could no longer support it, while seemingly failing to learn the survival skills of the people who knew the land best. Their world shrank season by season until the last family on the last farm simply could not endure another winter. The fate of the Greenland Norse is a haunting lesson in fragility. It was not one single disaster that erased them, but a cascade of interconnected failures: climate change, economic isolation, and perhaps a fatal reluctance to change. They did not vanish in a mysterious puff of smoke. They faded away, their voices growing softer until the Arctic wind was all that remained. The Black Death did more than claim lives, it shattered the very systems designed to remember them. When a third of Europe perished in just a few years, the toll was not merely counted in bodies, but in the silence that followed in parish registers and tax rolls. Imagine the local priest tasked with recording every baptism, marriage, and burial in the village. For generations, his predecessors had maintained this sacred ledger. Then the plague arrives. In a single week, he might bury dozens, then scores. The rhythm of life gives way to an unending procession of death. The inkwell runs dry, and the priest himself falls ill. The meticulous record of a community, the proof of its continuous existence, simply stops. The ledger ends mid-sentence, a permanent gap in the story. This was not a failure of diligence, but a collapse of the entire administrative machinery under a weight it was never built to bear. The sheer number of the dead overwhelmed the living who were meant to count them. In smaller, more isolated villages, the devastation could be absolute. A settlement of 100 people might be reduced to a handful of traumatized survivors. With no family left, no lord to answer to, and their neighbors all gone, these last few individuals had little choice. They would gather their meager belongings and walk to the next village over, blending into its population. Their old home, now empty and decaying, would soon be reclaimed by forest. In the eyes of the wider world, that original village did not slowly fade away, it vanished overnight. Its name would never appear on a new tax assessment. No royal official would ever ride out to check on it again. The bureaucratic memory of that place and the unique identity of its people was extinguished as surely as the lives lost. Pandemics were therefore a primary engine of historical erasure. They did not just kill individuals, they deleted communities from the official record, creating voids in our historical narrative that are impossible to fully reconstruct. We are left with only the silence, wondering how many names were lost in the chaos, their stories forever untold. A slow, creeping chill can empty a landscape as effectively as any plague. While the Black Death created sudden, horrifying voids, the onset of the Little Ice Age was a thief that worked by degrees, stealing away the very means of survival over generations. This was not a single cataclysm, but a relentless squeeze. Average temperatures in Europe began a gradual decline from around the 13th century onward. What seems like a minor shift on a chart meant, in reality, shorter growing seasons, unpredictable weather, and relentlessly wet summers that rotted grain in the fields. For a population living on the razor's edge of subsistence, this was a death sentence written in the rain and the cold. A series of failed harvests did not just mean hunger, it triggered a chain reaction of social collapse. First came the famine as stored grain was consumed and nothing replaced it. Then came the desperate migration as families abandoned land that could no longer support them. This left behind ghost villages on marginal lands, places that were only ever fertile during the warmer centuries that came before. Consider a farming family high in the Alps or on the windswept moors of Scotland. For 200 years, their ancestors had coaxed barley from that thin soil. Then the springs arrived later, the autumn frosts earlier. One bad year could be endured. Two would break them. After the third failed harvest, with their livestock dead and their children starving, the only rational choice was to gather what they could carry and walk away. They would seek work as laborers in a more fertile valley or a growing town, merging with the destitute crowds and losing their distinct identity. From the perspective of a medieval chronicler, this was not news. A monk writing in his scriptorium would record the death of a king, a battle, a papal decree. The slow, silent dispersal of a handful of peasant families in a remote valley was beneath his notice. Their suffering was invisible, their migration unrecorded. So when we look at the historical record for that valley, we see only a cessation. The rent payments to the local lord stop. The parish register ends. The village name simply drops from all documents. The official memory offers no explanation, only a void. This is where environmental history becomes a vital detective. By studying ice cores, tree rings, and pollen samples from ancient lake beds, scientists can reconstruct the climate these people lived through. They can see the evidence of those cold, wet years that the chronicles ignored. This silent testimony from the natural world often provides the only clue to why a community vanished. The land itself remembers the changing seasons that forced its people to leave. How many of history's empty spaces were created not by war or pestilence, but by a slow, inexorable change in the wind? A marching army is a force of erasure. While chroniclers meticulously recorded the names of nobles who fell in battle, they often ignored the true cost of medieval warfare, the systematic annihilation of the countryside that supported those armies. A king's campaign was not fought only on a field of honor. It was waged in the grain stores of peasant villages and the timbers of their homes. The deliberate strategy of the chevauchée, a raid designed to burn and pillage, was meant to terrorize a population and destroy an enemy's economic base. A single such raid could turn a dozen thriving communities into smoking ruins within a week. The people who lived there did not simply wait to be killed. They fled, they gathered what they could carry and ran into the forests or the hills, becoming refugees in their own land. Their old lives were left behind in the embers. Where did they go? Often, they drifted to the relative safety of a walled town, merging with the crowds of other displaced souls. In this new urban anonymity, their distinct identity as people of a specific village, with their own local customs and oral histories, was quickly diluted and then lost. They became just more faces in the poor quarter, their origins forgotten. The official record might note the great battle that prompted the raid, but it would never list the names of the families whose world was turned to ash. Their disappearance was a silent, administrative side effect of conflict. The chaos of war created a profound fog. When a region was repeatedly contested, with armies marching back and forth for years, the entire bureaucratic apparatus could collapse. Tax collectors could not operate in a war zone. Manorial courts ceased to function. The scribes who kept the records were either dead or had fled themselves. In this informational vacuum, entire populations could effectively vanish from history. They were not necessarily wiped out, but they were rendered invisible, their existence no longer documented by any central authority. The violence of the era did not just kill people, it severed the fragile threads of memory that connected them to the future. The lure of the city was a powerful, silent current that slowly pulled people away from the land. Across late medieval Europe, the rigid structure of the manor, where peasants were bound to a lord and a plot of earth, began to soften. A new world of possibility was opening within the walls of growing towns. A proclamation from a king or a local lord might offer a tantalizing promise. Any serf who could live within a town for a year and a day without being claimed by their master would be granted their freedom. This was not just a legal technicality, it was a beacon of hope. For a young person facing a lifetime of laboring on the same fields their ancestors had worked, the city represented a chance to become someone new, to learn a trade, to earn wages, and to escape the predetermined path of rural life. This migration was a steady, individual choice repeated by thousands of people over decades. It was the opposite of a sudden catastrophe, a slow leak of human potential from the countryside. A village might lose its most ambitious young men and women, the very generation needed to sustain its future. With fewer hands to work the fields, the community's productivity would decline. The local mill might fall into disuse. The parish church, once the center of social life, would see its congregation shrink. The village did not explode, it simply withered. From the perspective of the manorial lord, this presented a curious accounting problem. His records, which once meticulously listed every tenant and their obligations, now showed a growing number of vacant holdings. The income from his lands began to dwindle. After a while, it became administratively pointless to keep a separate account for a place with only a handful of elderly residents. The village would be absorbed into the records of a larger, neighboring manor, or its name would simply stop appearing in the rolls altogether. It had faded below the threshold of official notice. This economic shift redrew the demographic map of Europe from the bottom up. The disappearance was not marked by fire or plague, but by quiet administrative erasure. The people themselves had not vanished. They had simply moved to where the opportunity was, leaving behind empty houses and a silence that the old records mistook for oblivion. How many of our ancestral villages are just such quiet endings, their stories not lost to tragedy, but to the hopeful journey of their children toward a brighter horizon. A new name, a new faith, could erase a people as completely as any plague. On the fringes of empires and in the wake of conquest, a different kind of vanishing took place, one of cultural and religious assimilation. This was not a physical extinction, but a transformation so profound that the original identity of a population simply melted away from the historical record. When a dominant power expanded its borders, it often brought with it a forceful package of language, law, and religion. To survive and thrive under this new order, local populations had little choice but to adopt the customs of their rulers. A pagan chieftain seeking favor with a Christian king might undergo a very public baptism. His people would follow, their old gods and rituals abandoned under pressure. The stone idols in their sacred groves were toppled, and in their place a church was built. This conversion was more than a spiritual shift, it was an administrative one. The old oral histories, the genealogies tied to pagan heroes, were no longer valid. The scribes who now recorded their lives were Christian monks who had no interest in preserving the stories of a heathen past. They began new chronicles, writing only of the community's life after its rebirth in the faith. The previous centuries, the entire cultural memory of the people, were effectively silenced, deemed unworthy of remembrance. Consider the Christianization of the Saxon tribes by Charlemagne's Frankish Empire. The historical record from the Frankish side speaks of conquest and forced conversion. But the Saxon perspective, their own stories and identity, was systematically suppressed. Their previous existence was framed as a dark age of ignorance, now thankfully overcome. In the official documents that survived, they ceased to be Saxons with their own distinct traditions and became simply new members of Christendom. Their unique voice was lost, not to violence alone, but to the overwhelming tide of a new cultural narrative. This blending creates a ghost in the historical archives. Archaeologists might find evidence of a long-standing settlement with shifting burial practices, pagan graves gradually replaced by Christian ones. But the written record tells only the story of the Christian community. The people who lived there did not vanish, but their ancestors, their former selves, were erased. They became someone else in the eyes of history, their origins obscured by the very process of integration that allowed them to survive. How many cultures have we lost not because they died out, but because they were written out of the story? Even the most telling archaeological clues can be washed away by time itself. A crumbling stone foundation tells us a house was here, but it cannot whisper the name of the family who lived within its walls. This is the fundamental limitation we face when we rely solely on the earth to speak for the vanished. Archaeology uncovers the stage, but the actors and the script of their final days are often lost. The physical evidence of a settlement is constantly under threat from natural forces long after its people are gone. Soil erosion can slowly scrape away an entire village site, layer by layer, leaving nothing but a scatter of pottery fragments in a plowed field. A later generation, unaware of what lies beneath, might build a new town directly on top of the old one, their foundations and cellars obliterating the fragile remains of the community that came before. These post-depositional processes, the quiet work of rain, wind, and human progress, can erase a population from the landscape as effectively as any deliberate act. But even when a site is perfectly preserved, like the ash-buried city of Pompeii, the interpretation is an act of detective work with missing witnesses. An archaeologist might uncover a village where the tools are all left in place, the hearths cold, and no human remains are found. This clearly shows a planned, orderly abandonment. But the critical questions remain unanswered. Why did they leave? A change in climate, a new economic opportunity elsewhere, the threat of raiders, the silent stones offer no reason. We see the empty houses, but we are left to guess at the fears or hopes that propelled the exodus. A single gold coin minted in a distant kingdom might be found in the dirt of a long-deserted farmstead. This object is a tantalizing clue, proof of some far-flung trade connection, but it cannot tell us if the coin was payment for wool, a souvenir from a pilgrimage, or the last savings of a refugee. Without a written record, a charter, a letter, or a will, the material evidence is a locked box without a key. We can analyze the types of pottery, the design of buildings, and the seeds left in a storage pit. These things paint a picture of daily life, but they are silent on the subjects that truly define a people, their laws, their language, their personal beliefs, and their individual stories. The post hole of a house tells us its size, but not the laughter that once filled it. A grave goods tells us about status, but not the name of the person honored. This is the poignant divide between the story of a culture and the story of the individuals within it. Archaeology gives us the grand narrative of a population's rise and fall, but it rarely recovers the intimate, human-scale details that written words can provide. We must therefore read the landscape with humility, understanding that every excavation is only a partial truth. The full story of any disappearance is a tapestry woven from both threads, the hard evidence dug from the ground and the fragile words preserved on parchment. When one is lost, the other can only tell us so much. A whisper on the wind can carry the memory of a lost people long after the last stone of their village has crumbled. Before the written word became common, the collective memory of a community lived in the stories told by the fireside, passed from grandparent to child in an unbroken chain. These oral traditions were the living archives of the people, holding their history, their laws, and their identity. When a population vanished from the official record, its echo might still resonate in the local folklore that survived it. A tale told for generations about a valley that was cursed, a place where no one would build, might be the folk memory of a village wiped out by a plague that no chronicle ever mentioned. A legend of a tribe that was swallowed by the earth could be a distorted recollection of a community that abandoned their homes during a great famine. Even stories of fairy folk stealing away entire families could be a supernatural explanation for a very real and very tragic disappearance that no one living could rationally explain. These narratives are not random fantasies. They are often rooted in a deep communal trauma, a cataclysm so profound that it embedded itself into the cultural psyche and was retold in a mythical language that the people of the time could understand. They represent a shadow history, a parallel narrative that runs alongside the silent official record. Yet, for all their tantalizing potential, these folk memories are like a river stone, their original sharp edges worn smooth by the relentless flow of time and retelling. With each generation, the story adapts. Details are added or subtracted to fit the beliefs and fears of the current audience. The historical reality of a Viking raid might, over 5 centuries, transform into a story of a dragon laying waste to the countryside. The precise reason for an exodus is lost, replaced by a more dramatic, more memorable motif of a curse or divine punishment. This fluidity makes folklore an unreliable witness in a court of historical fact. We can rarely take a folktale at face value and extract a precise date or a specific cause. What we can glean is the lingering emotional truth, the consistent fear associated with a particular forest, the universal belief that a certain hill is haunted. These persistent feelings point to a real event that once shattered the peace of that landscape. They are the ghostly fingerprints of a past that writing failed to capture. So when we listen to an old local legend, we are not hearing a factual report. We are hearing the long, fading echo of a people who are otherwise silent, a whisper from the shadows of history that reminds us some stories are too powerful to ever completely die. A village could vanish with the stroke of a scribe's pen. The most peaceful and orderly of disappearances occurred not through plague or war, but through the quiet machinery of administrative reorganization. When a king died and his lands were divided among his sons, or when a powerful monastery was granted new territories, the entire bureaucratic landscape could shift overnight. A settlement that for generations had been recorded in the rolls of one northern county might suddenly find itself under the jurisdiction of a southern sheriff. Its name would be carefully crossed off one master list and, in theory, written onto another. But what if that new list was lost on a muddy road or stored in a different archive that later burned? To a historian looking only at the old county records, that village has simply ceased to exist. It has become a ghost in the system. The problem was compounded by the nature of medieval maps, which were often symbolic representations of power rather than precise geographical guides. A beautifully illuminated chart might show a king receiving homage from his vassals, but it would not accurately depict the winding path of a river that marked the true boundary between two lordships. A village situated in that disputed borderland could be claimed by both sides or by neither. For decades, its residents might pay taxes to one lord, only to have a new legal ruling declare they actually belonged to his rival. In the resulting transfer of authority, the careful records of their tenancy could be misplaced, misfiled, or deliberately destroyed to erase the previous lord's claim. The people are still there, tending their fields and living their lives, but their official identity has been severed from its past. They have been administratively reborn, their history before the transfer effectively erased. This fluidity of governance meant that a community's continuity in the historical record depended on a fragile chain of paperwork. A single broken link, a lost charter, or a rewritten tax assessment could create the illusion of a fresh settlement where in reality an old one had always stood. How many of the new villages that appear in later documents are not new at all, but simply old communities that were lost and then found again by a different branch of the bureaucracy? The most permanent disappearances often happened at the very edges of kingdoms, in the marchlands where central authority was weak. When a border was formally redrawn by treaty, populations could be transferred like property. The people living there might wake up one morning to find they were now subjects of a different crown, speaking a different language, and answering to a new set of officials who had no knowledge of their old records or customs. From the perspective of their former kingdom, they were gone. Their names vanished from the tax rolls, their lands were removed from the maps. They had not died or migrated, but they were no longer part of the story that kingdom told about itself. This is the final, quiet fate of many lost populations. They did not fade into the mist, but into a filing error, a border dispute, or a royal decree, leaving behind only the silent question of where one world ends and another begins. A lost city in the jungle does not always signal a forgotten apocalypse. Our modern imagination often paints these disappearances with a dramatic brush, envisioning civilizations of immense wisdom wiped out by some unknown cataclysmic force. This romanticized vision, however, can obscure the true, more complex stories written in the soil and the archives. The appeal of a mysterious, advanced people who left behind only enigmatic ruins is powerful, but it frequently leads us to misinterpret the evidence before our eyes. We must carefully separate historical mystery, which is a genuine gap in our knowledge, from pseudo-historical fantasy, which fills that gap with speculation unsupported by facts. Take the famous case of the so-called lost colony of Roanoke. When English settlers vanished from their coastal settlement in the late 16th century, the only clue left behind was the word Croatoan carved into a post. This single word sparked centuries of wild theories, from alien abductions to supernatural vanishings. The far more probable explanation, supported by later research and the context of the carving itself, is that the colonists simply did what any sensible group would do when facing starvation and isolation. They moved in with a nearby Native American community, the Croatoan people, and over time, their distinct English identity faded through intermarriage and assimilation. They did not vanish into thin air, they integrated into a new society. This process of demystification is not about stripping the past of its wonder. It is about replacing a simplistic fantasy with a richer, more human reality. The truth is that populations rarely disappear without a logical, traceable reason. The evidence for economic collapse, climate shift, or cultural integration is almost always there, waiting in the tax records, the tree rings, or the oral histories. Choosing to ignore this evidence in favor of a more sensational narrative does a disservice to the people we are trying to remember. It turns their real, often difficult lives into a mere plot point for a mystery. Understanding that a village was emptied by the slow creep of a glacier, or that a culture was absorbed by a more powerful neighbor, grants those people a dignity that myths of ancient astronauts or cursed lands cannot provide. Their story becomes one of adaptation, resilience, or tragic circumstance, a chapter in the long, complicated human story rather than a bizarre anomaly. The next time you hear a tale of a civilization that vanished without a trace, ask what the quieter, more patient evidence has to say. The official records of the Middle Ages were never meant to tell the whole story. The chronicles that have survived, penned by monks in quiet cloisters, obsessively track the lineage of kings and the outcomes of holy wars. A peasant village fading from existence was not news, it was beneath notice. This creates a profound and systemic bias in our evidence. We are trying to solve the mystery of a disappearance using clues left by people who would not have cared that it happened. The very sources we rely on are structurally blind to the lives of the vast majority of the population. Tax rolls, those precious lists of names, are equally skewed. They meticulously record every freeholder who owed a portion of their grain or a day of labor to their lord. But what of the landless laborers, the wandering craftsmen, the families who rented a small patch of soil year to year? These people, often the most vulnerable and mobile, left no paper trail. Their existence was informal, and their disappearance was administratively silent. If an entire community consisted of such landless poor, they could vanish without a single word being written about their passing. Our view of the medieval demographic landscape is therefore like looking at a star chart that only shows the brightest celestial bodies. We see the blazing suns of royalty and the steady planets of the landowning gentry, but we miss the countless dimmer stars, the common people whose light made up the true fabric of the night sky. Their absence from the record is not proof of their unimportance, but of our sources' narrow focus. Acknowledging this fundamental bias is not an admission of defeat. It is the first crucial step in peeling back the layers of silence. It forces us to read the archives against the grain, to listen for the echoes in the empty spaces, and to ask not just what the documents say, but who they were written for and who they chose to ignore. A lone pollen grain preserved in lake mud can speak volumes about a changing world. This tiny, durable clue is one piece of a vast puzzle that no single academic discipline can solve alone. The great challenge in understanding these disappearances is that the evidence is scattered across different fields of expertise, each with its own language and methods. Historians decipher the fragile parchments, while archaeologists excavate the physical remains. Meanwhile, climatologists read the story of past climates locked in ice cores and tree rings, and geneticists trace the ancient migrations written in human DNA. For generations, these disciplines often worked in isolation, like detectives on the same case who never compare their notes. The result was a fractured and incomplete picture. A historian might declare a village abandoned in a specific year based on a final tax record. An archaeologist, finding no evidence of fire or violence at the site, would be left with a mystery. Why did they leave? The answer might lie not in a document or a ruin, but in a core sample taken from a nearby lake bed. The science of palynology, the study of ancient pollen, can detect the precise moment when tree pollen began to dominate over grains from cultivated crops. This tells a story of fields lying fallow, of the forest slowly reclaiming land that had been farmed for centuries. It is silent, powerful proof of an environmental shift that the written record never mentioned. On a much broader scale, genetics can now trace the movement of people in a way that chronicles never could. Historical accounts might describe the invasion of a region by a new group, suggesting a bloody replacement of the existing population. But ancient DNA extracted from skeletons, both before and after this supposed invasion, can reveal a more nuanced truth. The genetic evidence might show a significant influx of new people, confirming the written record. Or it might reveal a story of integration and intermarriage, where the local population was not wiped out but blended with the newcomers, their genetic legacy continuing on. This changes the entire narrative from one of disappearance to one of transformation. The true power to solve these ancient mysteries lies in the synthesis of all these disparate threads. A single field of study operating alone can only offer a partial answer. It is only when the tax record, the abandoned hearth, the changing tree ring, and the genetic marker are all laid side by side that a complete human picture begins to emerge. The story of a people is written in more than just words or stones. It is written in the very landscape and in their own bodies. To hear it, we must learn to listen to every voice. Even the word population is a trap when we peer into the medieval past. We use it today to mean a clearly defined group of people living within a fixed set of borders, a county or a nation, all counted in a modern census. But that neat container-like idea of a population would have been utterly foreign to most people living 1,000 years ago. So the first fundamental challenge is this: what exactly are we saying disappeared? Is it the tenants of a specific manor, bound together by their shared obligation to a single lord? Is it the inhabitants of a village, a physical cluster of homes and fields? Or is it a tribe, a people united by language, custom, and a shared story of origin? These categories were fluid, overlapping, and often temporary. A family might be considered part of the population of their village for legal purposes, but part of a much wider kinship group or tribe for matters of marriage and identity. When we look for a disappearance, which of these groups are we tracking? A manor could be dissolved, its lands absorbed by a neighboring estate. The legal entity vanishes from the records, its tenant population officially ceasing to exist. But the people themselves did not vanish into thin air. They likely stayed right where they were, now owing their rents and services to a different lord, their names now entered on a different roll. From our distant vantage point, it looks like one population has been replaced by another, when in reality, it was just a change in the bookkeeping. This fluidity of identity makes pinpointing a moment of disappearance almost impossible. There is rarely a single day when the last person died or moved away. More often, there is a slow unraveling of the bonds that define the group. A few families move to a growing town. Others marry into the next village over. The local dialect begins to fade as people adopt the speech of a more dominant neighbor. The unique legal customs of the manor fall out of use. The tribe as a political force is absorbed by a kingdom. At what point in this gradual process do we declare the population gone? The moment its name stops appearing in royal charters. The generation when no one living can remember the old stories. This is why the very idea of a fixed, bounded population is an anachronism, a modern concept we unthinkingly impose on a much more messy and mobile past. We search for clean lines and clear endings where none existed. The people of the Middle Ages did not see themselves as static components of a demographic statistic. They were part of a flowing river of kinship, obligation, and movement. To understand their disappearances, we must first learn to see the world through their eyes, a world of shifting identities and fragile connections, where a community could fade away long before the last of its people were gone. The name of a place can be a fossilized memory. Scattered across our maps are labels that act as ghostly signposts, pointing to communities that have long since faded from view. The field of toponymy, the study of place names, deciphers these clues. A location marked as deserted village on a modern ordnance survey map is a blunt and obvious testament to a disappearance. But far more subtle are the names whose origins lie in a language no longer spoken in that region. A rolling hill in England bearing a name derived from Old Norse like Thwaite, meaning a clearing, signals the presence of Scandinavian settlers centuries ago, a population that eventually blended into the larger English society, leaving only their words on the landscape as proof they were ever there. The evolution of a single name over time can read like a brief history of conquest and cultural shift. A Roman town might be taken over by Saxon invaders who give it a new name. That Saxon name is then recorded in the Domesday Book by Norman French clerks who spell it phonetically. Centuries later, local pronunciation has smoothed it into something entirely new. Each change in the spelling and sound is a layer of paint over a lost identity, a quiet signal of a people being administratively and culturally absorbed. Yet interpreting these names is a delicate art. A place called Slaughterford might conjure images of a horrific battle, when in reality it could simply mean a muddy ford derived from an old word for mire. The evidence they provide is circumstantial, a whisper rather than a shout. They tell us that people of a certain language were here, but not how many, not how they lived, and not precisely why they left or changed. They are the starting point for a mystery, not the solution. Onomastics, the broader science of names, offers this unique linguistic window. It allows us to hear the faint echoes of lost worlds in the syllables we use every day to navigate our own. When you drive past a village called Chester, you are hearing the Latin word for a camp, castra, on the lips of every local, a direct echo of a Roman legion that marched away 2,000 years ago. The people are gone, their empire dust, but their name for that place endures, a fragile thread of memory spun from sound alone. The ink of a monastic chronicle could only flow as far as the monastery's walls reached. These religious houses were the hard drives of the medieval world, the central repositories where history was written and preserved. Monks, in their quiet scriptoria, meticulously recorded events in year-by-year chronicles known as annals. Without their diligent work, vast stretches of the medieval past would be absolute darkness. They noted everything from the death of kings and the outcomes of battles to strange weather and local miracles. This provides an invaluable, seemingly continuous thread of narrative. Yet this thread has a very limited reach. A monastery was an island of literacy in a vast sea of oral tradition. Its chroniclers wrote about what they knew, what they saw, and most importantly, what their wealthy patrons and benefactors told them. Their geographical focus was intensely local, rarely extending beyond the monastery's own estates and its network of political and religious allies. A thriving village 100 miles away, in a region with no monastic houses, could suffer a terrible famine, be dispersed by raiders, or simply dwindle away, and the event would never once trouble the pages of a surviving chronicle. Its disappearance would be administratively silent and historically invisible. The monastic view of the world was also deeply theological. Chroniclers interpreted events not as random occurrences, but as manifestations of divine will. A plague was not a biological catastrophe, it was God's punishment for a sinful people. A harsh winter was a lesson in humility. This theological lens profoundly shaped what was considered worthy of recording and how it was explained. The slow, economic dispersal of a village due to changing farming practices held no moral lesson, so it was ignored. A single dramatic event, like a fire that burned a church, was recorded as a sign of divine displeasure. This creates a distorted picture for modern historians. We are left with a record full of sudden, divinely ordained catastrophes, but almost entirely devoid of the slow, grinding social and economic forces that were the true engines of most historical change, including the quiet disappearance of countless communities. The monastic chronicle is therefore both a treasure and a trap. It offers a priceless window into the medieval mind and a timeline of certain events, but it is a window with a very narrow frame and a heavily tinted pane. Relying on it alone to understand demographic shifts is like trying to map an entire continent using only a single, beautifully illustrated, but highly subjective postcard. A continent away, the silent stone cities of the American Southwest tell a similar story of a vanishing. The ancestral Puebloans, a people often known by the Navajo word Anasazi, built breathtaking cliffside dwellings into the canyon walls of places like Mesa Verde. Their multi-story stone palaces, tucked beneath soaring rock overhangs, represent a high point of architectural and community achievement. Then, in the 13th century, these places were abandoned. The story of their disappearance from these grand homes is a powerful parallel to the medieval European mysteries, revealing that the forces that erase populations are universal. For generations, these communities thrived in a challenging landscape. They mastered dry land farming, cultivating maize, beans, and squash in the arid soil. They built elaborate systems to catch and channel every precious drop of rainwater. Their society was complex, connected by trade routes that stretched for hundreds of miles. Then the climate began to shift. A great drought lasting for decades settled over the region. Tree rings from that time tell a story of relentless dryness, a period where the already scarce rains failed year after year. This was not a single bad season. It was a climatic shift that pushed their sophisticated agricultural systems beyond the breaking point. The land could no longer support the population it once sustained. But the evidence suggests the end was not caused by drought alone. In their concentrated communities, the people likely faced a slow crisis of resource depletion. Firewood for warmth and for cooking would have had to be carried from farther and farther away. The fertile soil around their dwellings, overfarmed and eroded, would have become less productive. Some archaeologists point to signs of social unrest, perhaps conflict over the dwindling resources. Doorways in some cliff dwellings were later sealed up with stone, as if to block entry, and evidence of violence has been found. This paints a picture of a society under multiple, simultaneous pressures, environmental stress leading to social fracture. The people did not simply vanish in a puff of smoke. They migrated, they moved south and east, joining existing Pueblo communities or establishing new ones along rivers like the Rio Grande. Their distinctive culture as cliff dwellers came to an end, not because they died out, but because they made a collective choice to leave and integrate elsewhere. Their unique identity in that specific place and architectural style disappeared from the historical record of the canyons, absorbed into the broader tapestry of Pueblo peoples. This story powerfully expands our perspective beyond a Eurocentric view. It demonstrates that the quiet disappearance of a population from its homeland is not a uniquely medieval or European phenomenon. It is a recurring human drama, a testament to the vulnerability of all societies when faced with the powerful, intertwined pressures of a changing environment and internal social strain. The silent, sun-baked cliff dwellings stand not as a mystery of a lost race, but as a monument to human adaptation, a reminder that sometimes the only way to survive is to walk away from the very homes you spent centuries building. The same fragmented records that once obscured these populations now hold the key to finding them. In the digital age, historians are wielding new tools that act like a powerful lens, bringing blurred details from the past into sharp focus. This is the work of the digital humanities, a field where technology and history converge to ask old questions in entirely new ways. By compiling thousands of scattered entries from tax rolls, parish registers, and manorial accounts into vast, searchable databases, researchers can perform a kind of mass digital resurrection. A name that appears only once in a dusty ledger in one county can be instantly matched with the same name appearing in a court record 50 miles away a decade later. This connection, invisible to any scholar reading the documents one by one, reveals a story of migration, not disappearance. The person did not vanish, they simply moved, and only by linking these digital breadcrumbs can we trace their path. Geographic Information System, or GIS, mapping takes this a step further, turning columns of names and dates into a visual landscape of human movement. Imagine plotting every single deserted medieval village in England on a digital map, and then layering over it data about soil quality, climate records, and the boundaries of old monastic estates. Patterns emerge that were once impossible to see. Researchers might discover that a cluster of villages vanished not at random, but precisely along the path of a newly enclosed sheep pasture owned by a specific Cistercian abbey. The economic motive for the disappearance becomes visually undeniable. These virtual reconstructions allow us to test long-held theories. Was a population truly wiped out by war, or did they simply consolidate? By modeling travel times and resource availability, a computer simulation can show how practical it would have been for the survivors of 3 small hamlets to abandon their isolated homes and merge into one larger, more defensible village a day's walk away. The digital model does not give a definitive answer, but it reveals the most logical, probable scenarios that the silent archives cannot describe on their own. This process is not about creating a perfect, error-free version of history. It is about probability and pattern recognition, using the cold logic of statistics to warm the bones of the past. A statistical model can analyze the frequency of names in baptismal records before and after a suspected plague. If common local names suddenly drop out and are replaced by an influx of new ones, the software can calculate the statistical likelihood of a major demographic rupture, confirming a historical catastrophe that was only guessed at before. These digital tools are giving voices to the ghosts in the archives, not by inventing stories, but by revealing the hidden connections and logical pressures that shaped their lives and their ultimate fate. We are learning to read the empty spaces between the words, finding whole communities living in the silence. These vanished populations are more than just names on a faded parchment. They are ancestors, their stories woven into the identity of living descendant communities. For these groups, a lost village is not an abstract historical puzzle. It is a chapter in their own family saga, a piece of their heritage that was violently or quietly taken from them. When researchers arrive with their shovels and their theories, they are not just digging for artifacts, they are touching upon sacred ground and intimate loss. The ethical responsibility in this work is immense. It begins with a fundamental shift in perspective, seeing these communities not as subjects to be studied, but as partners whose voices are essential to the narrative. This means moving beyond the old model of extraction, where artifacts and knowledge are taken for academic study without giving anything back. True ethical practice requires collaboration from the very start. It means sitting down with tribal elders or local historians before a single test pit is dug, listening to their oral traditions, and incorporating their questions and their concerns into the research design. They are the keepers of a living memory that can provide context no document ever could. Imagine a team investigating a site where a community was displaced by enclosure. By working with the descendants of those evicted, the researchers might learn of a folk song passed down for generations, a lament that speaks of the sorrow of leaving the old home. That song is as vital a piece of evidence as any tax record, giving emotional depth to the dry economic data. Sensationalism is another ethical trap. It is tempting to frame these disappearances with dramatic language, to speak of curses or ancient evils to capture an audience. But this turns real human tragedy into entertainment. It disrespects the dead and misleads the living, obscuring the complex social and environmental truths that are often at the heart of the story. The goal is not to invent a thrilling mystery, but to respectfully uncover a human reality, no matter how ordinary or difficult it may have been. History, at its core, is not a cold case file to be cracked. It is a story with real human stakes, stretching from the past directly into the present. The choices we make in how we tell that story, whose voices we amplify, and whose dignity we preserve, determine whether we are honoring the lost or merely exploiting their silence. Our pursuit of knowledge must always be guided by empathy, ensuring we are not repeating the same erasure we are trying so hard to understand. That final silence echoes through the centuries. To lose a people's story is to suffer a wound in the tapestry of human experience, a tear through which countless individual lives, loves, and struggles have simply fallen away. This is not merely an academic curiosity, it is a profound cultural and psychological loss. Each vanished village and assimilated tribe represents a unique thread of tradition, a particular way of seeing the world that has been irrevocably severed. The songs they sang to their children, the recipes passed down through generations, the local legends that explained the shape of a hill or the name of a stream, all of it vanishes into that silence. This creates a void in our collective memory, a permanent break in the chain that connects us to the full spectrum of human creativity and resilience. We are left impoverished, able to see only a fraction of the picture of our own past. This historical loss holds a dark mirror to a fundamental human anxiety, the fear of being forgotten. From the grandest pharaoh building a pyramid to the humble farmer hoping his name is remembered by his descendants, the drive to leave a mark to prove we were here is a powerful force. The complete erasure of entire communities confronts us with the possibility that all our struggles, all our joys and sorrows, could one day mean nothing, that the sum of 100 lives could be reduced to a blank space in an old ledger. These disappearances are not just about them, they are a sobering lesson for us. In a digital age where our own records exist as fragile bits of data on corporate servers, understanding these historical vanishings forces us to ask urgent questions. How are we preserving the stories of our own time? What voices are we failing to record? The meticulous work of recovering the past is not just about solving ancient mysteries. It is an act of defiance against oblivion itself, a commitment to ensuring that future generations will not have to stare into similar silences where our own cities once stood. The next breakthrough might not come from a library archive, but from a single tooth. Paleogenetics, the study of ancient DNA, is revolutionizing our ability to trace the movements of people who left no written records. By extracting genetic material from centuries-old skeletal remains, scientists can now answer questions that have puzzled historians for generations. Did a village truly die out, or did its people simply pack up and migrate en masse to a new region? Genetic evidence can reveal patterns of ancestry and kinship, showing us the invisible roads that populations traveled long after their footprints have faded from the earth. This allows us to replace speculation about a mass death with evidence of a mass relocation, transforming a mystery of extinction into a story of survival. Alongside this biological detective work, climate science is providing ever more precise context. New climatic models, built from ice cores and sediment layers, can now reconstruct past weather patterns with astonishing detail. We can move beyond knowing a century was generally cold to understanding the specific years of catastrophic spring floods or summer droughts that would have doomed a harvest. This lets us connect environmental pressures to historical events with a newfound clarity, seeing the exact moment when the climate turned against a community and made their way of life impossible. The digital frontier offers another powerful lens. Advanced text analysis algorithms can now read through thousands of pages of medieval documents in minutes, searching for patterns no human eye could ever catch. These tools can identify the slow, gradual disappearance of a place name from all records, or trace the subtle linguistic shifts in a local dialect as it was absorbed by a more dominant language. This is not about replacing historians, but about giving them a powerful new set of eyes to see the shadows in the data. Perhaps the most promising shift is the move toward collaboration, not just between universities, but with the public itself. Citizen science projects are now inviting local communities and amateur historians to become part of the search. Imagine a project where people can upload photos and descriptions of old ruins they find in the woods, or help transcribe digitized manorial rolls from their own ancestral regions. This crowdsourced effort taps into a vast reservoir of local knowledge and enthusiasm, turning every curious person into a potential co-author of history. The quest to find the lost is far from over. It is entering its most exciting phase, a collaborative dance between the lab and the library, the supercomputer and the local historian. The silence of the past is not an impenetrable wall, but a curtain we are only just beginning to pull back. A tapestry reveals its true picture only when you step back from the individual threads. The disappearance of a medieval population was almost never a simple story with a single villain. It was a cascade, a perfect storm where multiple pressures converged to push a community past its breaking point. Think of the Norse in Greenland. Their end was not just the cold, nor just the loss of trade, nor just their cultural inflexibility. It was the chilling combination of all three, each weakness amplifying the others until the entire society could no longer hold. An isolated village in Europe might have weathered a bad harvest, or a new tax, or the encroachment of a greedy lord. But when a series of failed harvests coincided with a lord deciding to enclose the land for sheep, and a plague then carried off the few remaining laborers, the result was not just hardship, it was erasure. The community's resilience was exhausted on too many fronts at once. The economic, the environmental, and the social are not separate forces in history. They are intertwined strands in the same rope. A change in climate, a shift in trade routes, a new law from a distant king, these were not abstract events. They were pressures that translated directly into empty stomachs, difficult choices, and the slow unraveling of a way of life. The final silence in the records is the echo of that rope snapping. The administrative systems of the time, fragile and biased as they were, could not possibly capture this intricate collapse. A royal clerk noting a village name missing from a tax roll saw only an empty entry, a simple administrative fact. He did not see the complex interplay of drought, disease, and displacement that created that emptiness. The messy, multifaceted reality of the disappearance was thus flattened into a single, silent data point. This is why we must resist the temptation to seek one simple answer. The truth of these vanishings lies in the connections between the clues, in the space where the environmental data from a tree ring meets the economic data from a manor account, and the archaeological evidence of a hurried departure. The tapestry of the past is woven with both vibrant thread and profound void, and to understand the whole picture, we must learn to see the beauty and the meaning in the empty spaces as well.